start with Yoga Sutra Patanjali. What made me write this book? Not write, actually I transcreated into modern English. There have been quite a few translations of this book, and I also have written a long, very exhaustive interpretation in Indonesian, but I have never interpreted it that exhaustively in English. In English it is just a transcription. What induces me was someone came here, like you, and he told us that his teacher, his yoga teacher, has made it compulsory not to read any book on yoga. Will you believe that? I was stunned. But then I studied about this teacher, and yes, I found out that he was against his students to study about yoga. It was enough, according to him, to just do the exercise. Exercise, asana, what we do and what we consider as yoga is one thing. But yoga is quite another thing. What is the meaning of yoga? If you study medicine, there are textbooks that you must study. You study law, there are textbooks that you must study. Practice is, yes, very necessary, but how do you practice if you have not studied? So it is just absurd that you don't study books and then you start practicing. And that practice that we do, what we call yoga, is just one small part of what yoga is. So practice is not a substitute to the right understanding of yoga. This is what we are going to study now from today onwards for several weeks. But each of these talks will be recorded, is being recorded, and you can see it on YouTube when they are uploaded there. So we are all here today for the very first class on Yoga Sutras. Now, a little bit about the author. Patanjali is very difficult to pinpoint when he was born, but it must be at least 2,500, 3,000 years old earlier. And he also he never claimed that he was the inventor of yoga. He said, I am just making a system out of it, systematizing it, putting them together. And yoga has been there for many, many years before me. If you see in our museum, if you have been to our museum on the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, we already have yogic postures there in the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, which is in Sindh, now in Pakistan. So you can see that even then yoga was already being practiced. 5,000 years ago, Krishna was talking about yoga, and he also never said that he was the inventor. So this yoga philosophy has been around for many, many, many years. To systematize it, Yoga Sutras were developed by Patanjali. Sutra means thread, to bring them together, as you will need a thread to put all the beads together, to turn it into mala or into necklace or whatever you call it. So also this sutra, this thread, is bringing together all the germs of yoga that have been there for thousands of years. Patanjali says, the very first sutra, the first chapter is called Samadhi Pada. Samadhi is enlightenment, Samadhi is equanimity, Samadhi is the purpose of what we are going to study here. So first chapter of Samadhi Pada, and the very first verse, first shloka of first chapter. Atha Yoga Anushāsanam. The meaning is, thus discipline or life governed by certain values is yoga. This is the definition given. So there are no 2, 3, 4 definitions. He is straightforward. Thus, discipline or life governed by certain values is yoga. Everybody is living. And you all may have different values. But when you are studying yoga, it is focused. You cannot say anymore, no, I don't want to follow these values, but I want to practice yoga. It's not possible. It is simply as not possible as, no, I don't want to study medicine, but I want to practice medicine. You can be sued for that. Unfortunately, there is no Patanjali around to sue you. But it is just not possible. No, I want to practice law, but I don't want to study law. It's not possible. So Patanjali is very clear that life governed by certain values, specific values. And what are those values? He is going to elaborate on that. Thus, discipline or life governed by certain values is yoga. Discipline is the very first thing, anushāsanam. If you just want to live life without discipline, then you don't need yoga. And if you want to practice yoga without discipline, then you cannot practice yoga. You are perhaps practicing something else. Just by doing certain asanas, you are not practicing yoga. You are simply doing some asanas. So, most of the certification that we get for 100 hours, 200 hours, 1000 hours is a certification for asanas, not for yoga. And those asanas also, as we go along, you'll see the flaws of the entire system. What we call as yoga certification, you'll see the flaw of the entire system. It is definitely not yoga. Thus, discipline or life governed by certain values is yoga. The second verse. Yoga, now, very, very focused explanation of what yoga is. Yoga is the cessation of the vrittis or modifications of chitta or mind at its very core. That is the seeds of thoughts and emotions. If you see all, I have not seen a single English translation where chitta is not translated as subconscious. Patanjali is not talking about subconsciousness. In the yogic philosophy, there is no such thing as subconsciousness. There is consciousness and there are seeds. There is at the core of this consciousness. What do you mean by subconsciousness? The very word sub means it is a subordinate to the consciousness. Right? Subordinate. Sub-director. He is not the director. He is subordinate to the director. But what Patanjali is saying is totally different thing. It is not subconsciousness, it is the seed of consciousness, from where consciousness is sprouting. So it is not sub. It is much more than your consciousness. What we call as consciousness, what we term as consciousness, what is termed as consciousness by Freud and Jung and including most of our modern psychologists. Patanjali is saying that is not even consciousness. This state, what the modern psychology is calling consciousness, is simply a state of wakefulness. I am awake, you are awake. It is a physical state. It is not a mental state. You can be awake, I can be awake, I can become the most important person in the world. I can govern a very big, huge country, a superpower, and yet I can move, I can work, I can act without consciousness. You can be very important person, you can be very rich person, you can be very successful person, that does not guarantee that you are acting consciously. To act consciously means to consider this environment, to consider everything, to see the same consciousness everywhere. And therefore yoga will definitely speak about very basic thing. If you are killing, slaughtering an animal to eat, to be put on your table, you are not behaving consciously. You are awake, but you are not conscious. You are not conscious of the life principle that is also in those animals. If you are behaving unconsciously, you become successful. The world can praise you, but according to yoga, okay, you are successful, you have got money, you have got good car, you have got good house, maybe houses, but you are not necessarily conscious. Now Patanjali is saying yoga is the cessation of the vrittis or modifications of chitta or mind at its very core, the seed of the mind, the seed of the emotion. He is not even talking about the mind. We are all governed by our mind. Now Patanjali is trying to tell us how to control this mind. Mind is controlling us right now. Patanjali is telling us how to control this mind. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they read this, they just read it like that without contemplating upon it. What Patanjali is saying, thousands of years after Patanjali, our modern day scientists, they just found out. I read this in a medical journal few years ago, that now they have got this MRI, the MRI, what does it stand for? I don't know. Anyway, this MRI to see the function of your brain. Now they have got perfected this system where you don't have still pictures. You can actually see the working of the brain live as a movie. So before a thought comes into your mind, there are certain parts of your brain which are already blinking. And those blinking, they are trying to find out now, because this is very minute, part of a second before a thought appears. There are certain parts which are already blinking like Christmas tree, Christmas lights. They are trying to understand the pattern, but they will never ever understand the pattern if they don't work together. It is not the job of a biologist only, of a medical scientist. It is a job of nuclear scientists. It is a job of physicists. All of them must be together. And once they are together, they can find out the pattern. So actually, before even a thought appears, a scientist can find out what you are going to think after a while. Patanjali is talking about this thousands of years ago. If you want to control your mind, it is impossible. You cannot control the mind just like that. You need a higher faculty. You need a higher faculty to control the mind that is of a lower, that is the lower faculty. So you get hold of the higher faculty. My master used to say, you put beans, green beans, soak them in the water, and they start sprouting, right? But if you boil these beans, the green beans, you boil them and then you soak them in the water, they won't sprout. The more you boil, the dead they are. The dead they are. They won't sprout again. So also, if you want to stop this sprouting of the mind, you have to address the seed, not the mind itself. And that seed is chitta. How to control the mind? To control the modification, the changes happening in your chitta. Not subconscious once again, but the seed of your consciousness. If you can correct your behavior at that level, then you are safe. Otherwise, you'll be taken for a ride by your mind. Most of us are right now governed by our mind. Our senses, our physical senses, our sense organs are helpless. The mind says this, we do this. We do this. Patanjali is not talking about God. Patanjali is talking about mind. So, here it is very clear. Patanjali is not so much dwelling on the subject of God. He'll be speaking about God later on. In a very one simple sloka, he speaks about God very, very briefly. But he is not interested in that aspect. So here Patanjali is standing like a scientist. He says, I am trying to understand this mind. Let us explore this mind. Why the mind is changing? What are the reasons? First of all, he says that if you are trying to control the mind, it will be a futile thing, because you are not killing the seed. The seed is sprouting. As long as the seed is sprouting, you want to control the mind, this mind is not going to be under control. So he is leading us to understand why the mind is working, how the mind works. And he says, from his understanding, the mind works because there are these seeds. And these seeds are sprouting under these conditions. Pratyaksha, Praman and all this. Under these conditions, the mind is sprouting. If you want to have a permanent change, then you make a change when the mind is about to sprout. So he is looking at that aspect. Of course, the words that he used are generic words. In Sanskrit, they are generic words. You can use those words for finding God. You can use those words for any subject. Not only for finding God, you can use those words for anything. As far as Patanjali is concerned, right from the beginning, right from Sutra 1, the very first quote, very first formula, he says, let us now talk about mind. Let us now talk about chitta, not even mind. He does not use the word mana. He will use later on. Mana, manas is mind in Sanskrit. He is not even using that word. He is using the word chitta, that is seed of the mind. If you handle this seed correctly, then this will sprout or may not sprout. You don't want this to sprout, then you kill the seed. You want it to sprout according to your wish, then you give the right kind of atmosphere, you supply the right kind of fertilizer, so that the seed grows according to you, not according to society, not according to education system, not according to all these things that we have been going through. And that's why this hall is also called boddhi-citta, the awakened citta. I used to use the word created mind. Right now, the mind we have got is not our own creation. How to create our own mind? This is where Patanjali is very scientific. He's going to even understand God from that angle. Okay. I would not say unconscious. You see, the thing with Jung is I try to study their lives, When I study someone and I like what he says, I try to study the life. This man was so scared. He wanted to go to pyramids. He wanted to see pyramid. But he could never make the journey to Egypt because he was so scared of death. This is Jung. Fine man, fine gentleman. Freud was not as bright as Jung. Freud was the seed that sprouted into Jung. Okay. I would say that. Unfortunately, during his time, our language was not really developed. I give an example. A very great brain from India that traveled to the West, and all these gurus traveling to the West must thank him, Swami Vivekananda, whose banner is there outside. So Swami Vivekananda, he was trying to avoid to use the word meditation. Because in those days, in 1800 something, meditation, the word meditation was connected with premeditative crime. So meditation was not a good word. He would use the word concentration. And until now, all his works, what he means by concentration is actually meditation. But we are using the same word. All the people who are following Vivekananda, they have not changed this word. Same thing with mindfulness, same thing with Jung. I personally think he was getting the point. He was talking about citta, but for want of a better word, he could not find a better word, and so he used the word unconscious. Yes, I think he got it there, and mind you, he was the very first person who said that Westerners should not learn yoga. Once Westerners start learning yoga, they'll make a fool of themselves. More or less like that, He was again right there, because unless you have gone through the discipline, I'm not sure whether he ever read Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. I don't know. I've never found the reference for that. But he is right. Without the discipline that you need, if you learn yoga, they will affect your nervous system. And instead of becoming more humble, you become more egoistic. And this is happening in the East now. Not only in the West, in the East, we are so much focusing on the physical exercise part of yoga that our nervous system is awakened and we become very egoistic. Whereas the very purpose of yoga is to become humble. Yes, I think Jung was getting there. Okay. Maybe that's the way. Without discipline is also discipline. You knock somebody's car, somebody knocks you, and then you get disciplined by yourself. Enough of being knocked. Okay, with that note, we have to close our session. It has been